In the heart of Scandinavia, a nation that prides itself on neutrality has, for decades, walked a fine line between moral high ground and betrayal. Sweden, often lauded for its peaceful policies and humanitarian ideals, holds a darker history that continues to echo into modern times. From its controversial support of Nazi Germany during World War II to its current dealings with authoritarian regimes, Sweden's claim to neutrality raises troubling questions about its true allegiances. In World War II, Sweden's relationship with Nazi Germany was marked by complex contradictions. While outwardly neutral, Sweden allowed its iron ore to fuel the Nazi war machine, ultimately enabling the very atrocities it claims to have opposed. And yet, even in the face of this complicity, Sweden has long cast itself as a victim of circumstance, using the guise of neutrality to justify its actions. Sweden's role and moral ambiguity in historical and modern contexts. Sweden has long been criticized for displaying double standards, meaning showing no morality at all, with an element of betrayal. Despite this, the nation often views itself as the victim, justifying its actions with excuses that many find unconvincing. This is a troubling pattern of behavior that continues to shape its national identity and international relationships. During World War II, the Nazis promoted a racist and nationalist ideology, particularly focused on anti-Semitism, Aryan supremacy, and the belief in the need for Germany to expand its territory. This ideology led to the Holocaust. Sweden, despite claiming neutrality, was far from uninvolved. Historical evidence reveals that Sweden facilitated German shipments to Norway and provided significant economic and logistical support to Nazi Germany. Yet, in Swedish schools, history is often presented in a way that minimizes or even omits this complicity. Almost all Swedish people have been led to believe that their country was neutral during the war, a claim that is easily disproved with a simple search on the web, where hundreds of pieces of evidence show Sweden's collaboration with Nazi Germany. In a relatively new book, Swedish Concentration Camps in the Shadow of the Third Reich by Niklas Sennerteg, it is revealed how Sweden helped Nazi Germany during the Second World War and how they built up armed concentration camps under the greatest secrecy in Sweden. Some of those who escaped the Nazis and came to Sweden and who continued their work against the Nazis ended up in secret camps. Sweden, on the other hand, portray themselves that Sweden would be neutral and embrace every victim of the war. There are enough facts on this subject to make you disgusted by the Swedish treacherous morality. You can buy the book here. Swedes, who often pride themselves on their moral stance, make numerous excuses for their actions during the war, such as claiming they lacked the capacity to resist Germany. This excuse falls flat when compared to Norway and Denmark, which, despite being smaller and less powerful, did not collaborate with Germany. One explanation to the Swedes' moral compass is related to never questioning the law and the state, regardless of whether the state violates their and international human rights. This culture of betrayal and self-interest has persisted into modern times. Today, Sweden is getting closer to another authoritarian regime. Turkey, under President Erdogan, often referred to as a modern-day fascist, due to his aggressive nationalism and repressive policies. According to ChatGPT, there's not much difference between fascism and Nazism. Recep Tayyip Erdogan personifies a hybrid of fascism and Nazism, advocating for totalitarian rule while perpetuating hate-filled notions of racial supremacy. How often has he not spewed hatred on Israel and increased anti-Semitism in the world? Turkey has supplied weapons to Hamas, the Palestinian organization that wants to destroy Israel and often chants from the river to the sea. The prominent writer, Michael Rubin, touches on this and writes about it in his article. Quote from Michael Rubin's article, "If Turkey arms Pakistan, should India help the Kurds?" During its October 7, 2023 assault on Israel, The greatest single-day slaughter of Jews since the Holocaust, Hamas used Turkish drones. Indeed, Hamas Izzad-Din al-Qassam brigades released a video 2 weeks later showing 3 Turkish drones manufactured by Istanbul's Asuva defense industry. Erdogan also wants to spread the Turkishness and the so-called Kizil Elma, Turkey's chase for the Red Apple, New Lines magazine. Obviously, there is infinitely more evidence that the modern Turkish regime is a Nazi-fascist state. That is so paradoxical. In Turkey, people try to talk about being Turkish, although the Turkish language spoken in Turkey is a combination of Kurdish, Arabic, Greek, Armenian and many other languages. The Turkish cuisine is also equally patched up. Most of the dishes are stolen from other cultures. Today, everything from language to food, etc., is sold, packaged and labelled as authentic Turkish. Just like Nazism, right-wing extremism is growing in Turkey. Gross racism and hate crimes are happening in the open street, often backed by the deep state in modern Turkey. Just like the Nazis, Turks and Erdogan's regime has made themselves guilty of ethnic cleansing and oppression, particularly against Kurds, Armenians and other minorities. The Turkish state has engaged in systematic efforts to eliminate these groups, often through violent means. Though it has failed to completely eradicate them, millions have been killed or assimilated, but the resistance, especially among the Kurds, continues. Not to mention all the uncertainties surrounding the cooperation between Turkey and ISIS during the early stages of ISIS's development. The relations between Turkey and Sweden, particularly in the context of NATO and the treatment of Kurdish communities, echo its World War II-era policies. Kurdo Bakshi has highlighted this issue in his article, NATO, Kurderna och Oskar Stenström. He writes about how the deep state in Sweden continues its recklessness, particularly with head figures like Oskar Stenström spearheading actions against the Kurds. This is reminiscent of how Sweden betrayed its Norwegian brothers during World War II, with little opposition from within the country. Oskar Stenström is a little bug if you look at the international scene. Michael Flynn, former National Security Advisor to President Donald Trump, was deeply involved in a controversy regarding his lobbying efforts for Turkey. Although Flynn was not explicitly convicted of bribery, his actions demonstrated a covert influence campaign directed by Turkish officials. You can imagine the power behind a state if they try to bribe you in various ways. Oskar Stenström is an average Swedish diplomat who never had a regular job and is currently on leave from his official state duties. Oskar Stenström became a key figure in Sweden and Turkey's NATO membership negotiations and works today, like his father did, with Sweden's strongest family, Wallenberg. Notice, the Wallenberg family is a prominent Swedish family renowned as bankers, politicians, bureaucrats and diplomats present in many large Swedish industrial groups and the weapon industry, Saab AB. No wonder they were a key player and pushed hard for Sweden to enter NATO. The author Joakim Medin was nominated to the Golden Shovel by Föreningen Gravande Journalister for his book The Kurdish Trail Sweden-Turkey and the Price of NATO Membership. Joakim Medin writes about how the Kurds have been criminalized by Sweden for their support to Turkey. Sweden's security police can send an innocent Kurd to Turkey in the blink of an eye. If there is a risk of being killed or tortured in Turkey, the Swedish government turns a blind eye. A nation of silence. Sweden's betrayal of its Norwegian brothers during World War II is a dark chapter in history, and the silence of the Swedish population at that time mirrors the lack of critical voices today as Sweden collaborates with Nazi-fascist Turkey to hit hard on minorities. This behavior underscores the perception of Sweden as a nation where betrayal is common, and where citizens prioritize their state's interest before their own personal interests, or even over their closest family and friends. In Sweden, there is a pervasive belief that one cannot trust their Swedish friends in times of crisis. If your friend is faced with danger and gets jumped by 2 others at the same time in a fight, 9 out of 10 times the Swedish instinct is often to stand aside and prioritize self-preservation. The concept of sacrifice and not abandoning one's basic human values and standing up for one's brother died in World War II. Norwegians should not forgive their Swedish brother for the betrayal during the Second World War, because the Swedes continue their treacherous nature. The Swedish state's witch hunt against the Kurds continues mercilessly to naively try to quench Erdogan's thirst for Kurdish blood. Even though Kurds are the world's largest stateless nation, perhaps 6 times larger than the Swedish nation, Swedish authorities believe that Kurds are easy to throw under the bus. After all, they lack representation in important organizations that recognize states can use to their advantage in violations of human rights. Maybe social media can change that a bit. This trait likely has historical roots, possibly stemming from the state's efforts to dominate the church and turn people into state slaves, focused on duty and responsibility rather than moral courage. The average Swede is only willing to be moral when it aligns with the state's interests. Lack of courage. Swedes often fail to show both civil and moral courage. In modern Sweden, these traits are increasingly rare, as the state has turned the nation into a collective slave hub. This is a phenomenon seen in many Western countries, where citizens are quick to turn in even their family members to the authorities in the name of law-abiding. To be law-abiding, no matter what, could be a Swedish phenomenon. In conclusion, Sweden's historical and ongoing actions reveal a pattern of betrayal, double standards, and moral ambiguity. Whether during World War II or in contemporary geopolitics, Sweden's choices often reflect a nation more concerned with self-preservation rather than with standing up for what is right. Siding with Nazi-fascist Germany and Turkey will tarnish Sweden's reputation for many more generations. Oskar Stenström, Wallenberg, and the Swedish government, led by Foreign Minister Tobias Billström, have now chosen to align themselves with fascists and Nazi Turkey, standing in stark contrast to murdered previous Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme. Although many on the right wing in Sweden show hatred against the murdered Prime Minister Olof Palme, I still want to remind you how Olof Palme stood against the murderous dictatorship in Spain, with Francisco Franco at the top. When the opposition in Spain was murdered and beaten down brutally, the Swedish Prime Minister Palme called them bloody murderers.
Francisco Franco låter avrätta flera unga oppositionella. Är Olof Palme brutal i sitt fördömande?
Fantastiska är ju att detta fortsätter. Att dessa satans mördare ska hålla på som det sker. Och de kommer att falla. Också i den djupaste skam och förnedring. Och historiens dom kommer att bli ohyggligt hård.
Bilden på den svenske statsministern med insamlingsbössan i handen blir känd över hela Europa.
Ja, jag gav där borta, men jag tyckte jag ville stoppa i din bössa också, Palme.
Tack ska Tack.
He didn't side with the fascists. Palme, who never hesitated to call Franco's murderous regime in Spain for what it was, always stood on the side of the oppressed. He personally visited Kurdish hunger strikers in Stockholm to show his support for their fight for human rights in Kurdistan. Olof Palme was shot to death in 1986. Today we witness how the same country that once proudly stood up for justice now drapes itself in the dark shadow of fascism. By supporting the Nazi-fascist regime in Turkey, the Swedish government, Oskar Stenström, the head of the Swedish Security Police, Swedish Security Service, Charlotte von Essen, and Minister of Foreign Affairs Tobias Billström and Ann Linde have betrayed Palme's legacy and chosen Goliath's and not David's side. Those who side with Goliath will always lose people's opinions, and more importantly, their support. It's a disgrace to Sweden and a betrayal of everything Sweden stood up for once upon a time. Some politicians would easily sell their souls to Satan for money. No human society should have the persons mentioned above as representatives. Kurds have not yet established Kurdistan as a state and are left vulnerable. Indeed, it often struggles to gain international recognition and support. We will leverage social media platforms to expose corrupt officials by sharing verified information and raising public awareness. Kurdistanrevolutionorg calls on everyone who cares about human rights and justice to act now. Together, we can make a difference. Here are some concrete ways you can help. Contact your local politicians. Write a letter or email to your local representatives, urging them to take a stand for the Kurdish fight for freedom and self-determination, and to reconsider Sweden's relationship with Turkey. Join demonstrations. Participate in protests or demonstrations supporting Kurdistan. Your presence strengthens the collective voice. Spread awareness. Use your social media platforms to share reliable news and articles about the situation in Kurdistan. Help raise awareness about what is happening. Support organizations. Donate or offer support to organizations working to defend Kurdish rights and fight against oppression. By standing up for the oppressed and showing our support, we can help build a better future for everyone. Let's show that Sweden still stands for the weak and against oppressive regimes.